The air smelled like diesel and wet asphalt. It was 5:42 a.m. at Fort Hamilton's main gate, the kind of morning where fog clings to chain-link fencing like it's trying to hide something. Headlights cut through the gray. Boots hit pavement in sharp, impatient rhythms. And in the middle of it all, a man sat in a wheelchair that looked older than the soldiers guarding the entrance. His coat was too thin for December. His hands were steady, but his knuckles were pale from the cold. On his lap, he held a small tin box, dented at the corners, wrapped in a strip of faded olive cloth like it mattered. "Visitor pass?" one of the young soldiers snapped. The man lifted his eyes. They were tired eyes, the kind that had learned to keep pain quiet. "I'm here to see the generals," he said softly. "Old friends." The soldier laughed like it was a joke written just for him. "Sure. And I'm here to meet the president." Another soldier stepped behind the chair without asking, grabbed the handles, and jerked it sideways, wheels squealing. "Exits that way, Grandpa." The chair rolled toward the far curb, away from the gate, away from the flag, away from the base that had once been his entire world. The man didn't fight them. He only tightened his fingers around that tin box, as if it was the last thing that still belonged to him. And when the soldiers leaned in closer to mock him again, one of them noticed the small detail stitched inside his worn coat collar. A name. A unit. A date. Then the man whispered a phrase under his breath, almost like a prayer. A phrase only a handful of men in the entire country would recognize. What the guards didn't know was, "Before we go further, tell me something. Where are you watching from today? Drop your city or country in the comments so we can say hi. And if you love slow burn stories with real heart, subscribe so you don't miss the next one." Now, let's continue. His name was Elias Mercer. Most people saw the wheelchair first. The missing legs second. The age lines around his mouth last. But Elias didn't become a man in a chair overnight. Life took him apart slowly, like it had time, like it could afford to be patient. He carried a small tin box on his lap everywhere he went. The lid didn't shut perfectly anymore. One corner was dented, like it had once been dropped hard and never forgiven. Inside were only a few things, but they had the weight of a lifetime. A black and white photo, for young soldiers sitting on the hood of a muddy Jeep, grinning like the war couldn't reach them. Elias was the one on the far left, jaw clenched, eyes bright. Next to him was a young man with a crooked smile and his arm thrown around Elias's shoulder like a brother. On the back of the photo, in fading ink, were the words, "Roommates. Always." A pair of dog tags, bent and scratched, the metal worn smooth where fingers had worried them during long nights. And one medal Elias never wore. Not because he didn't earn it, but because he couldn't look at it without tasting smoke. When he closed his eyes, the memories didn't arrive like stories. They arrived like weather. A damp cold that crawled into his bones. The sting of wind through torn fabric. The metallic bite of fear at the back of his throat. He remembered the sound of boots and mud, then the sudden silence after artillery, that unnatural quiet where you could hear your own breathing and it felt like a mistake to be alive. The night he lost his legs, the world turned into noise. Not one explosion, but a rolling thunder, like the earth cracking open and calling it duty. Elias remembered the smell first, sharp and sickly, burned pine, then oil, then something worse he never found a word for. He remembered crawling, dragging himself forward through mud that tried to swallow him, because someone was screaming, and the scream sounded young. A hand had grabbed his sleeve. A voice, his roommate's voice, ragged with panic. "Mercer. Leave me." Elias didn't. That was the kind of man he was. Not loud. Not shiny. Just stubborn in the quietest, most dangerous way. After the war, people clapped. They said hero like it was a gift. Parades passed. Flags waved. Strangers shook his hand with eyes full of admiration they didn't have to carry afterward. Then the applause faded, and real life began. Hospitals were bright during the day and cruel at night. Pain came in waves, burning, phantom, intimate. His body insisted on feeling what wasn't there. Stairs became cliffs. Bathtubs became battlefields. He learned how quickly friends could turn into holiday cards and good intentions. He also learned the heavier wound was guilt. Not the guilt of surviving. The guilt of surviving unfinished. He kept one letter folded in his wallet until the paper went soft and tired. A short note, written fast, ink pressed hard. Eli. If we ever make it home, you'll be at my house first. You'll sit at my table. You'll meet my kids. That's an order. Signed, James Caldwell. Back then, Caldwell wasn't a general. He was just a young man who laughed too loudly to hide his fear, and who slept on the bunk beside Elias like the two of them could keep each other alive by sharing the same air. Time turned boys into old men. And it turned promises into something that either breaks you, or brings you back. Elias didn't come to the base for revenge. He didn't come to demand respect, or to prove anything to anyone who would never understand. He came for something smaller. Something almost embarrassingly simple. He came to keep a promise from a lifetime ago. The morning he left his apartment, the world felt like it was holding its breath. He moved slowly, packing only what mattered: the tin box, his wallet, a folded paper with a phone number he wasn't sure still worked, and a worn cap that still carried the faint shape of a military insignia. His hands didn't shake when he put the cap on. But his chest did something strange, like an old door resisting being opened. Outside, the air cut through his coat. The cold didn't just bite, it stayed. It sat in his joints and reminded him of every winter he'd spent pretending he didn't need help. The ride to the base was quiet. A small bus with cracked vinyl seats and the smell of stale coffee. Elias stared out the window as fences and empty lots passed by, and in the reflection of the glass he saw his own face, older, thinner, carved by years he'd never asked for. Each mile felt like stepping closer to a version of himself he had buried. He kept hearing Caldwell's voice in his head, not as a memory, but as a presence. You'll be at my house first. Elias didn't know if Caldwell remembered. He didn't know if the man in the newspaper photo still had room in his life for ghosts from 1944. He didn't even know if Caldwell would want to see him like this, half of a man, held together by metal and stubbornness and a heart that refused to stop caring. But the article had said retirement ceremony today. And something inside Elias, something old and loyal, had made a decision before his fear could argue. When he reached the base, everything looked both familiar and foreign. The same fences. The same gates. Different uniforms. Younger faces. The flag snapped in the wind, sharp and proud, and for a moment Elias felt a sting behind his eyes that had nothing to do with the cold. He approached the checkpoint like a man walking into a courtroom. Two soldiers stood under the overhead lights, their breath visible in short bursts. One held a clipboard like it was a weapon. The other leaned on the barrier, chewing gum, bored in the way only people safe enough to be bored can be. ID, the first soldier said. Elias offered what he had, an old veteran card, worn at the edges, his name printed in fading ink. The soldier barely glanced at it. This doesn't get you on base, he said. You need a visitor pass. Appointment. Escort. Elias swallowed. I'm here to see General Caldwell. The second soldier let out a laugh, quick and bright. Yeah? You and everyone else. Elias tried again, softer this time, as if volume might make it less ridiculous. We served together. I just need a moment. The first soldier's eyes flicked over him, over the chair, the coat, the tin box, like scanning for trouble and only finding inconvenience. Nope, he said. Turn around. Elias felt the words hit somewhere deep. Not because they were new, but because they were familiar. Doors had closed on him for decades. Jobs. Buildings with stairs. Conversations that ended when people got uncomfortable. He forced his voice to stay steady. Please. Tell him Elias Mercer is here. The soldiers exchanged a look. A smirk. The kind that came from youth, from certainty, from never having had your life reduced to a request. Then one of them stepped behind the wheelchair. And without asking, without warning, he gripped the handles and pushed. Hard. The wheels squealed as the chair pivoted away from the gate, away from the flag, toward the exit lane where cars rolled out like nothing mattered. Elias's hands tightened around the tin box until his fingers ached. He didn't shout. He didn't beg. But inside him, something began to crack, slow and silent. Because he wasn't just being turned away from a military base. He was being turned away from the last place where his past still had a name. The wheelchair rolled toward the exit lane, the wheels rattling over the uneven pavement like a warning no one bothered to hear. Elias let it happen. Not because he agreed. Because he had learned, the hard way, that some humiliations are easier to survive when you don't give them the satisfaction of your reaction. The soldiers were still laughing behind him. It wasn't cruel in the dramatic way people imagine cruelty. It was casual. Thoughtless. The kind that comes from youth when you believe the world owes you entertainment. "Hey, make sure he doesn't wander into traffic," one of them called, like Elias was a stray dog. Elias stared at the gray road ahead. Cars passed with their windows closed, drivers focused on their own mornings, their own lives. He felt very small then. Not physically. Emotionally. Like a man being erased in real time. He breathed in slowly. On the flagpole behind him, the flag snapped in the wind, loud and clean. The sound cut through the laughter, and for a moment Elias felt something old rise in his chest, an instinct, a reflex, a piece of training that had never left him. His right hand moved without asking permission. He lifted it, trembling slightly, and gave a crisp salute toward the flag. It wasn't perfect. His shoulder hurt. His body was older now. But the salute was real. The laughter faltered. One of the soldiers squinted, suddenly unsure why his stomach tightened. "Why is he saluting?" the second one muttered, like the gesture had violated an unspoken rule. Elias lowered his hand and looked down at the tin box. His thumb traced the dented edge of the lid the way someone might trace a scar. He didn't plan to open it. Not here. Not in front of them. But the wind had other ideas. A gust pushed hard across the checkpoint lane, sharp enough to make the soldiers pull their collars up. It caught the strip of faded olive cloth wrapped around the tin and tugged it loose. The lid shifted. The metal clicked. And in that small moment, barely a second, something slipped out and fluttered to the ground. A photograph. It landed face up near the curb. 4 soldiers. Mud. A jeep. A grin that belonged to a younger world. One of the guards stepped forward, irritated. "Hey, you dropped." His voice died when he saw it. Because the photo wasn't just old. It was famous. The soldier recognized it the way people recognize something they've seen framed on walls without ever thinking it belonged to real hands. He'd walked past it 100 times inside the base headquarters, under glass, beside a plaque. The Caldwell Unit, 1944. The night before the push. The guard bent slowly, almost reverently, and picked it up. His fingers stopped at the back of the photo where the ink was faded but still legible. Roommates. Always. Then he noticed something else. Elias's coat had shifted open in the wind, and the inside lining, frayed, repaired, stitched by someone who didn't care about looks, exposed a patch Elias had kept hidden for decades. A unit patch. Not the modern kind. A World War II-era insignia, rare enough that collectors paid money to own replicas. But this one wasn't a replica. It was worn. Real. Stained at the edges. Lived in. The soldier's face changed. His smirk vanished like someone had slapped it off. "Sir," he said, and the word came out wrong, caught between confusion and fear. "Where did you get this?" Elias didn't answer immediately. He simply reached into his tin box and pulled out the dog tags. They clinked softly as they fell into his palm. Then he spoke, quiet as breath, and delivered a phrase that hit the air like a key turning in a lock. "Tell Caldwell," Elias said. "Tell him his bunkmate finally came home." The soldiers froze. One of them stumbled back a step, eyes wide now, voice cracking as he grabbed the radio. "Gate security to HQ," he said fast. We have a veteran here. Name Elias Mercer. He's asking for General Caldwell." A pause. Static. And then the radio answered, sharp and sudden. Repeat that name. The social world shifted in a heartbeat. And the men who had laughed a moment ago now looked at Elias like they were standing in front of a living monument they'd just insulted. Because it wasn't just that he was a veteran. It was who he had been. And who still remembered him. The radio hissed again, louder this time, like even the static had turned serious. "Hold him at the gate," the voice ordered. "Do not move him. I'm on my way." The soldiers didn't speak. Their faces had gone pale in the way people do when the past suddenly becomes real and personal. One of them swallowed hard, eyes fixed on Elias like he was afraid the man might vanish if he blinked. Elias said nothing. He simply sat, hands resting on the tin box, shoulders braced against the cold. A minute passed. Then another. The laughter from earlier felt like it belonged to someone else. Like it had happened to a different man, in a different world. A black sedan rolled into view from inside the base, its tires cutting a clean path through the wet pavement. It didn't slow the way normal vehicles slowed at checkpoints. It approached with calm authority, as if the gate itself existed to obey it. The soldiers snapped upright, suddenly remembering posture, suddenly remembering respect. The sedan stopped. The rear door opened. And Lieutenant General James Caldwell stepped out. He was taller than Elias remembered, or maybe rank had a way of adding inches to a man. His hair was silver now, cut close. His uniform was immaculate, the kind of neatness that looked effortless only because it cost something. But his face changed the moment his eyes found the wheelchair. For a second, Caldwell didn't move. He stared as if his mind was trying to fit the present into an old photograph and failing. Then his gaze dropped to the tin box. To the dog tags in Elias's palm. To the World War II unit patch peeking from the coat lining like a ghost refusing to stay buried. Caldwell took one step forward. Then another. Slowly, like approaching something fragile. His throat worked as if words were stuck there. His eyes shimmered, and it didn't look like age. It looked like memory. "Eli," he breathed. Elias lifted his chin. The cold had made his cheeks red, but his eyes were steady. "James," he said. That was all. 2 names. 2 syllables each. And 40 years of distance collapsed between them like a bridge snapping into place. Caldwell reached the wheelchair and stopped, hands hovering as if he didn't know where to touch without breaking something. His voice came out rougher now. "I thought," he tried again. "I thought you were gone." Elias gave the smallest shake of his head. "Not gone," he said. "Just delayed." The general's face twisted, pain flashing across it like a shadow. He knelt. A lieutenant general, on wet pavement, knees in the cold, lowering himself until he was eye level with the man in the chair. The soldiers at the gate looked like they'd forgotten how to breathe. Caldwell's hands finally found Elias's, careful, firm, like holding on mattered more than appearances. "I wrote you," Caldwell said, voice breaking on the confession. "I wrote and wrote. They said the hospital transferred you. They said," he swallowed hard. "They told me to stop searching." Elias's jaw tightened. For a moment he looked away, not because he didn't feel, but because feeling too much at once could drown a man. "I got your letter," Elias said quietly. "I kept it. Until it became soft." Caldwell's eyes filled fully now. Tears gathered, then fell without permission, streaking down a face that had commanded rooms and armies. "I failed you," Caldwell whispered. Elias's voice softened, almost tired. "You lived," he said. "That's not failing." Behind them, the base had gone quiet in a strange, reverent way. Cars slowed. A few officers stood at a distance, unsure if they were witnessing a private moment or history. One of the guards, the same one who'd pushed the chair, looked like he wanted to disappear into the asphalt. Caldwell stood abruptly and turned, his voice suddenly sharp enough to cut steel. "Who touched his chair?" he demanded. No one answered fast enough. Caldwell's stare swept over them, and the silence became heavy, absolute. Then he looked back at Elias, and his voice changed again, gentle, almost pleading. "Come with me," he said. "Not to the ceremony. Not to the office." His grip tightened on Elias's hand. To my house. To my table. Like I promised. Elias blinked hard, his composure finally cracking at the edges. For the first time, his voice trembled. All I wanted, he admitted, barely audible, was 1 hour, before you disappeared into retirement. Caldwell leaned in, forehead almost touching Elias's. You're not late, he whispered. You're right on time. And when Caldwell finally pulled Elias into a careful, aching embrace, uniform against worn coat, metals brushing old cloth, the world around them seemed to remember what honor actually meant. Not applause. Not salutes for show. But two broken men finding each other again, and refusing to let go. They didn't take Elias through the front doors like a ceremony prop. Caldwell wouldn't allow it. Instead, the general guided him through a quieter entrance, away from the crowd, away from the microphones, as if protecting the moment mattered more than proving it. The base felt different now. The same fences. The same concrete. But the air had shifted. People didn't stare at Elias like an inconvenience anymore. They looked at him like a man whose pain had earned its own gravity. Caldwell rode beside him in the sedan, not in the front seat where rank belonged, but in the back, shoulder to shoulder like the old days when they shared a bunk room and a cigarette in the dark. Neither spoke much at first. Some reunions are too heavy for quick words. At Caldwell's home, the warmth hit Elias immediately. The scent of coffee. Wood polish. Something simmering in a kitchen. Normal life smells. Life that kept going while Elias learned to survive in smaller spaces. Caldwell's wife opened the door, her eyes moving from the general's expression to the wheelchair, then to Elias's face. She didn't ask questions. She simply pressed a hand to her mouth, overwhelmed by the truth her husband had carried for years without saying it. This is Eli, Caldwell told her, voice tight. My brother. The word landed like a blessing. Inside, the general's adult children arrived, then grandchildren, drawn in by urgency and a kind of respectful curiosity. Elias sat at the table, hands wrapped around a warm mug, listening to a family he'd never met speak his name as if it belonged in their house. The tin box sat beside his cup like a small, silent witness. Later that evening, Caldwell did what powerful men rarely do. He apologized without protecting himself. I should have found you, Caldwell said, standing in the doorway of the guest room, uniform removed, just a tired old soldier now. I had men. I had resources. His voice broke. I had no excuse. Elias stared at the window for a long moment. Outside, snow started to drift, soft and slow. You were building a life, Elias said finally. I was, learning how to live with what was left. Caldwell nodded, tears in his eyes again. Let me help now. And this time, Elias didn't refuse. The next weeks were quiet but transformational. Caldwell arranged proper medical evaluations without spectacle. Better prosthetic consultations. Physical therapy that didn't treat Elias like a case file, but like a man. A counselor who understood war didn't end when the shooting stopped. Paperwork that had been a maze for decades became simple under the weight of a signature that people listened to. Elias moved into a small, accessible home near Caldwell's neighborhood, not as charity, but as restoration. A place with ramps that didn't feel like shame. A bathroom he could use without bruising his pride. A doorway wide enough for his chair and his dignity. But redemption wasn't only about comfort. It was about purpose. Caldwell introduced Elias to a veteran outreach program on base. At first, Elias resisted. He didn't want to be a symbol. He didn't want speeches. Then he met a young soldier missing an arm, sitting with clenched teeth and empty eyes, the same haunted look Elias had worn after the war. Elias rolled closer and said one sentence, quiet and honest. It doesn't get easier all at once. The young soldier looked up. It gets easier, in pieces. That became Elias's role. Not a hero on a poster. A man in a chair who showed others they could still be whole. Caldwell watched it happen like sunlight returning to a room he'd kept dark for too long. And Elias, slowly, stubbornly, began to let hope feel real again. Not loud hope. Not perfect hope. Just the kind that shows up every morning and says, "You're still here." That means something. Some wounds don't close the way people expect. They don't seal neatly, leaving only a faint scar you can trace like a finished story. Some wounds stay open in quiet ways. They ache when the weather changes. They flare when a song plays on the radio. They wake you up at night with memories that have no mercy. Elias learned that healing wasn't a straight line. It was a slow return of small things. A full breath without pain. A laugh that didn't feel guilty afterward. A meal at a table where no one looked at him with pity, only with space. And still, even as life softened around him, Elias couldn't forget that morning at the gate. Not because he wanted revenge. Because it was a reminder of how easily the world misjudges what it cannot recognize. Those soldiers weren't evil. They were careless. And carelessness can cut deeper than cruelty, because it proves how invisible a person can become. That's the part most people don't understand about unseen heroes. They don't walk around glowing. They don't announce what they survived. They stand in line at the pharmacy. They sit on buses. They struggle with doors that are too heavy. They go quiet when someone says, "You don't look like you've been through much." They carry whole wars behind their eyes, and still they hold the door for you. Elias never wanted the soldiers' fear. He never wanted their shame. He wanted something harder, something rarer. He wanted them to learn. Because punishment can make a moment loud, but it doesn't always make a life better. Accountability does. Caldwell did discipline them, yes. There were consequences. Real ones. Not for drama, but for principle. The kind that forces you to sit with your own behavior until you understand what it says about you. But what changed them most wasn't the reprimand. It was the image they could not erase. A frail man in a worn coat saluting the flag with hands that trembled, not from weakness, but from history. A general kneeling in the cold, crying without shame. A base falling silent because honor suddenly meant something again. And if you think this story is only about soldiers and veterans, it isn't. It's about all the times we've been too quick to judge someone's worth by what we can see. A limp. A stutter. A battered car. A quiet person in the corner who doesn't demand attention. A mother who looks tired. A father who looks lost. A stranger whose story you'll never know unless you treat them gently enough to trust you with it. Second chances aren't always offered in grand moments. Sometimes they show up in a small act of recognition. A name spoken with respect. A chair pushed in the right direction, not toward an exit, but toward belonging. And the truth is, most heroes aren't heroic because they never fall apart. They're heroic because they keep living after they do. They keep showing up with a heart that has every reason to close, and somehow doesn't. Elias didn't get his legs back. He didn't get his youth back. He didn't get the years he spent disappearing in plain sight. But he got something else. He got proof that the world can still correct itself. That people can still choose to do better. That love can survive time, shame, distance, and war. And maybe that's the quiet lesson here. That healing isn't the absence of pain. It's the return of meaning. Slowly. Patiently. One honest moment at a time.